Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us. We build for this to be an electric vehicle leadership dialogue, and I think we've hit a home run. We went straight to the top when it came to leadership, and we're very thrilled to have Robyn Denholm with us, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. We'd encourage you to please start asking questions as soon as you'd like through the Q&A function on the Zoom app. If you have any technical issues, please do feel free to use our chat function. Our trusty Alex will be there to help you, but myself and Robyn won't be able to see that. So please do take your questions to the Q&A function for us to be able to see. So starting us off, first of all, thank you very much for being here, Robyn. For those of you who don't know, if you've been living under a rock, Robyn is obviously the chair of Tesla, but has a very rich history in the tech, business and finance community, having worked at Juniper Systems, being on the board of ABB, Telstra, being the chief financial officer of Telstra, and not being in a very first role in the automotive sector, obviously also with a background at Toyota Motor Corporation in Australia. Robyn Denholm, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
We're very pleased to have you here. Robyn, I'm going to kick us straight off with a discussion about electric vehicles. We've been billing this as an opportunity for our audience to hear from a global leader in the electric vehicle sector. That sometimes people use language like that as hyperbole. If anything, I think we've understated it because we have a global leader from a global leading company in the electric vehicle sector. So I'll start off by asking you, as you guys sort of look around the world and undertake this mission to electrify our transport systems, how do you think we're going today, and sort of where do you see the electric vehicle market heading?
Yeah, no, I'm very optimistic about the market. I think, obviously, I'll put COVID aside for a minute, but through the end of last year and even as we rounded the new calendar year, I think the market itself is actually past the tipping point of electric vehicles happening. It's more of a matter of when, not if it's going to happen. And from our perspective, that's obviously a really good sign. And so it doesn't matter whether you're looking at Europe or Asia or the US, markets are really starting to embrace the technology that is available with electric vehicles.
So you did mention, I guess, what that first hurdle was of, is this the future or isn't it? I mean, I agree. I think that question's largely been solved, and now would say when, not if anymore. What do you think that sort of next big hurdle, what's the next thing that you guys are scanning the environment for?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously continuing to grow the adoption rate in terms of different economies around the world. I joined the board of Tesla in 2014, so quite some time ago now in electric vehicle adoption. That has obviously started to accelerate in terms of different markets around the world. And from my perspective, seeing that continuing to happen, and in new markets as well, the adoption rate starting to tick up.
That's a really good view of the world. Now, if I can draw us a bit closer to home, Australia, how do you think we're doing, I guess, particularly when you compare it to that global scan? What are the issues there? I think, there's the very obvious portion of uptake's lower than everywhere else. Why do you think that is, and what do you think can change?
Yeah, I think, Australia, from an Australian perspective, I do think we are lagging in terms of adoption rate. The stats prove it, which is quite unusual for us. I think, I'm a technology optimist, but I also know, having been in the technology world for, over 30 years, I should say that quite quietly actually these days, but for over 30 years. And we tend to be an early adopter of technology, and I don't, it doesn't matter which industry, we've been on that early curve. But I'm also pretty optimistic it's not too late. We're not way behind. The market's still evolving, and new models from different providers are coming out all the time. And so from my perspective, I do think we have a little way to go to catch up, but it's not insurmountable in terms of catching up with the rest of the world, and even potentially surpassing. Again, from my perspective, we have a huge opportunity to lead in the whole renewable energy space, including in the EV part of that ecosystem. And I think it just takes willpower and knowledge and education for us to do that.
Well, I guess you're in that privileged position of looking at the electric vehicle market right around the world, being an Australian, being here in Australia as well. Because what would you think of as, what are other people doing particularly well that we're not doing here? And what are some of those first few steps we can take to start catching up?
Yeah, I think there are three key criteria in any market, and I've seen this globally in terms of the market itself, and then I'll get into some of the ways that I think governments can help, and what I've seen in different markets as well. But to me, there's sort of three fundamental things that precede the ramp up of adoption in terms of each market. And one is, and they're not in any particular order, but one is the education of the population around what electric vehicles are and what they're not. Before this new wave of vehicles from Tesla and others in the space, people's perception of an electric vehicle was a golf buggy, right? So, how am I going to drive to A to B in a golf buggy as opposed to a real car, that type of thing. So that education in the marketplace, I think the last election was very telling in terms of the amount of misinformation that was in the marketplace. I think the second is range anxiety. People still think that you can't commute, regular commutes with an electric vehicle without topping up, and that's not the case, as you know. And the third is really getting the charging infrastructure in place. So to me, there are sort of three areas that in any market you've got to have those addressed to actually see the adoption curve start to increase. And I think turning to public policy. I'm a self-professed small G government. I actually am not a big.
Not really against you. That's fine.
but I also believe that in technology changes, transformations in industries, the government does have a role to play. And I think in this space, whether it's on the emissions side and creating certainty about reduction in emissions that need to happen from a vehicle transportation perspective, whether it's on the charging infrastructure, having policy certainty over a horizon that makes it attractive to industry to get behind it. And then, to me, the rest of it will happen if that's there. From an economic point of view, the technology is already there, and the economics around the technology are quite attractive to industry. So I think that will happen if there is policy certainty there.
It's when you say that'll happen, I guess there's certain agreement there, and I guess there's two different questions there, both globally and Australia. But what do you think we're looking at in terms of, do you think we're looking at a view of selling the last ever internal combustion engine vehicle? Is that within our horizon, in our lifetime?
Oh, absolutely, in our lifetime. Yeah. So, and my lifetime's probably not as long as yours because I'm a lot older, but from my perspective, I do think that will happen. We will see that globally, because I think that, as I said, I think the tipping point is behind us of whether we're going or not. I do think then it will start to accelerate. And one thing I didn't talk about in terms of the overall market, it's been my observation that, again, being in technology for a long time, that periods of economic downturn actually accelerate transitions in the tech space. You can see it, I could go back to the compute and storage, I can go back to the GFC and cloud computing, you can go back to the internet before that, so most of them, the technology trends had started before the economic downturn and then accelerated as you came out. And it makes sense economically, because you're not going to invest in the old technology if there is new technology to hand as you're coming out of an economic recession. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's really important for organisations like the EV Council and others to actually be advocating at this point, because I think getting that education up is really important.
Yeah, I think we've seen that right across the board, and overwhelmingly the message we've been hearing from people is, from different OEMs, from different car companies, is we've got a bit more time to think. We're hunkered down a bit, and if anything, we're doubling down on what the future for our business is. We're not thinking about how do we protect the ship. We're thinking about where are we steering the ship into the future. And that is yes, we need to be doing more on electrification. We need to be catching up to the Teslas of the world. As a chair of a business going through, I guess, unfortunately, we can't not talk about the pandemic, chair of a business going through this, and you're already on this journey. So what's changed in your guys' thinking? What do you think comes next?
I don't think anything's changed. I mean, obviously, and if I talk more generally rather than just specifically Tesla, I think from a business perspective, economic fluctuations are always there. Obviously, you don't have a pandemic all the time. So to me, there's the health crisis part of the pandemic, but then there's the real economic crisis. And I do actually think nobody knows what that's really like. I mean, there's a lot of pundits saying it's a V shape or a U shape or a double D shape. I've heard all sorts of different things. But from my perspective, nobody really knows what that economic scenario looks like. So from a business perspective, being nimble in terms of looking at downside and protecting that, but actually even more importantly is looking at the opportunities that type of economic dislocation offers, and being prepared to continue to invest in the things that really will make the future different. And I've seen that firsthand. I was the CFO and COO of Juniper Networks during the GFC. The networking industry contracted pretty dramatically over that period of time. But what we did there was to actually invest in R&D. And, we were pretty unpopular for a period of time because we said we were going to do that, and we did. And then actually were able to slingshot out of the recovery period. And I think that's the same in this industry. So, if people are reducing their investment in the future, that's not a good sign for me. And so I think, but from an industry perspective, I don't think that's the case. I actually think that there's a lot more investment going into EVs. Obviously, not just ourselves, but other companies out there.
You keep mentioning that investment into the future, and one of those investments that you highlighted was the need to help bring consumers along and help them understand what this technology is. And we certainly find that in the EVC when we do our consumer surveys. We find generally around half of people that we survey tell us that they want to buy an electric vehicle as their next vehicle. But if they've done any research around electric vehicles, or if we take them through any research, that jumps up to around 75–80%, usually just because of what you said I thought an electric vehicle was an electric buggy. I thought it went 100 kilometers. I didn't know what it was capable of. And now I do. My thinking has caught up. And I'm always fascinated when I go into a Tesla store or a Tesla showroom. It seems like 9 out of 10 people are there just to ask about electric vehicles and what are they and what do they do and how do they work. And for your guys thinking, is that something that you're putting up with, or is that something that you think is just a part of what an electric car company needs to do and the others need to be doing?
No, it's absolutely deliberate. So the initial sales and marketing strategy was to have no stores, to have no courtyards with vehicles in the lot. It was actually to do everything online. And even today, the way you order a vehicle, even though you're in the store, is actually online. It's the same set of tools. But what we discovered early on was that people needed to be able to talk to somebody to get them to explain things, how the vehicle works, what it looks like, all of that sort of stuff, and to, touch and drive the vehicle. And what we've found, and we continue to find, is that it's as much a source of information as anything else. I mean, people will do their research online, they'll talk to other people who have vehicles, but more often than not, it's that communication in face-to-face, or I don't know about today face-to-face, but in a normal environment face-to-face, to actually have their questions answered.
Right.
And I think that's important because it is a new technology. It would be, to me, the analogy is the first smartphones. I was around when the first smartphones came into being, and you went from a BlackBerry or a less sophisticated phone to a smartphone. Someone did need to talk to you about the benefits of moving over, or how it worked, or that type of thing. And I think it's very similar in terms of the EV space.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It is similar. It makes a lot of sense now because it's been happening for so long. And marking that earlier in your career, you worked at Toyota here in Australia, and this isn't the way that dealerships and car companies used to work in the past. Is that something you've seen? Has there been a lot of change?
Oh, it's a very different model. I mean, we're direct. We don't have dealerships. We have properties with you know, a storefront and but who you're speaking to at that site is actually a Tesla employee. Right. That's very different to the way vehicles have been sold for the longest time, probably for 100 years, maybe less than that, but in terms of having that dealership model. And what that does is we have a very good loop of information that comes back from the customers and from our staff in stores about, you know, features and understanding, and then also the service items and all of that sort of thing. It's actually a really good model, I think, going forward.
Now, if I can greedily take you back a bit around the electric vehicle industry, particularly here in Australia, our work in the Electric Vehicle Council is obviously to grow the market for the vehicles, but really with the aim of making sure Australia gets a slice of the pie when it comes to the industry itself. And Tesla is obviously one of the companies that, especially in the US, but right around the world, people look very eagerly for where's the next gigafactory going, where's the next manufacturing plant going. And I think we think of Australia rightly, quite proudly, as a country that has a lot of skills in the manufacturing sector, a lot of really bright entrepreneurs, and also a rich supply of mineral resources that are required to make the batteries in the first place. I wonder, both when you're looking around the world as a company of where to do the next big thing, where to put a lot of jobs, a lot of investment, what are you already looking at? How does Australia stack up? And really, what can we do? How do we get the next gigafactory?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'll say at the outset, we don't have any plans to manufacture in Australia at this time. But
hoping to catch you off guard.
I know, but you know, we do have our arms full with our global expansion program that we have right now. We're obviously, we've just built our first factory that's not in North America in Shanghai, and that's actually up and running. And the Berlin factory is under construction at the moment, and there will be another North America factory at some point to be announced shortly. But, you know, and that takes a lot of effort to actually get concurrent factories being built at the same time or globally. But I'll sort of take the point generically, because my view is that Australia has phenomenal talent in the automotive space. You probably know, you may not know, but our program leaders in Tesla are rock stars. They are absolutely the best of the best. Two of our very small number of important program leaders are actually Australians. So, you know, produced through the automotive space here. I think our talent is phenomenal. And so, and, you know, personally, it was actually quite a sad day when I heard that we were closing down our automotive space in Australia. But putting that to one side, I think, you know, there's a lot of attraction. When we're looking for locations to put factories, and this applies not just to Tesla, but other businesses that I've been in, because they're very different factories to what they were in the 90s. It's not about having a voluminous amount of people. It's actually about having world-class engineers, people who can automate factories. Because what we do at Tesla is, we call it the machine that builds the machine. And essentially what that is we take the same approach to building the factory as we do to building the car. That it's automation from the ground up, software from the ground up. So the type of people who are building our factories, yes, we have metal and steel and construction, but we actually have programmers and software engineers and people who are doing deep robotics, you know, those types of things. And Australia's actually got very good talent, small amount of talent, but we've got very good talent in that. And so one of the things from my perspective is that whole dialogue about advanced manufacturing needs to happen in Australia, because I think, you know, we've sort of kind of lost that along the way. And I'm very pleased that that dialogue is happening, because I think how we lay the foundations for the future of the country, you know, today will be what we grow from over the next 30 years. So I think having that as part of the dialogue and those skill sets that are part of the dialogue, working with universities and industry to actually make sure that those skills are valued. And, I often talk about it's as much a discussion around the dinner table as it is around the boardroom table, because we've got to value it as a country, as a population. We've got to be view that as a better track than being, than going down the, the finance or law or fin services route. Not that there's anything bad here. Obviously, I've come out of done okay
out of it.
And the accounting profession and that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, are they treated or viewed equally, or one better than the other? My view is that we should be encouraging a lot of our talent to go into those spaces.
Yeah, right.
So I think, and we do have brilliant engineers. I mean, again, I've lived in Silicon Valley for 16 years, and the number of Australians that are there coming, that are products of our university systems, that are doing, wonderful things there. Why can't we do that here?
It's funny, so often the conversation here is we're too small, we're too far away, we're too something or other. In your view, is there something that just prevents us, that is,
I think it's a mindset.
Yeah.
It's a mindset. I mean, we shipped 360,000 vehicles last year as a company. What's the Australian market? It's 1 million cars, right, a year. So, and the cars that we ship went all around the world. Right. We can produce a few 100,000 vehicles in Australia. Yeah. I mean, we as in the country can. And do it with technology that's to our standards, rather than having someone else's standards, imposed on us. Yeah. So I think that dialogue needs to happen. And obviously I'm optimistic, because I think we have great people, great skill sets. We have, a pretty educated population overall that's very technology forward. So, so from my perspective, I think it's a perfect time to be looking at those longer term plans.
Great. I also just wanted to say to our audience, I'm checking for questions on my phone here. I'm not sort of playing Tetris or something over on the side. So sorry if I look rude as I'm looking away. But look, the last, I guess, 2 points that we hit on, there's some commonality there of it's what Australia as a whole needs to do, what our government needs to do, both to help the market take off and to put ourselves in position for some of these, industry development opportunities. Is there a link between those two of what it is that we need to do to help accelerate the uptake of the technology in Australia and what opportunities we get as a result of that? Yeah,
I do think having a favourable set of policies around manufacturing locally, smart manufacturing, not just manufacturing, but smart manufacturing that makes economic sense. I'm not one for huge subsidies or that type of thing. I think the government plays a role in setting the policy framework for a long period of time, so that industry can come in and actually believe that they're working on a playing field that's not going to change all the time. Because as a as a board member, but also in past lives as an executive of global technology companies, what you want is to have certainty, and you want to have that for a period of time, because your investment horizons are quite long. They're not, things that you can change from month to month. So I think having that certainty, having a forward-leaning sort of mindset in terms of adoption of new technologies and helping that permeate through industry. I also think that consumers speak with their feet, and you've seen that time and time again in Australia. I mean, we have the highest penetration globally of solar PV in the world. Why is that? Yes, there was some, small government influence on that, but it's actually because it makes economic sense. Yeah. And on the EV side, it makes economic sense today. I've seen the reports from the Australian perspective, I've seen them globally. The technology is at a point that it makes sense for consumers to make that purchasing decision, because over the life of the vehicle, they're actually going to save a lot more than the differential in any upfront cost. Right. So, yeah.
So you mentioned, I guess, that what's important really is that long-term certainty. What do you think that looks like practically? Is it targets, sort of
yeah, I mean,
standards?
Again, coming from my background, I would prefer to have targets, but in the absence of targets, something that that at least sets the landscape where electric vehicles are treated equally, if not favoured, in terms of some of the regulations like FBT or luxury car tax or any of the other types of things. But also in terms of emissions, I do think that's an area that whether it's a gradual curve in terms of how much a vehicle can emit at any point in time, and that comes down dramatically over a defined period of time, right, I think is important. Yeah, and then to me, it gives consumers the opportunity of then understanding the landscape as well as industry.
I guess what we've seen a lot of governments do is maybe the more politically palatable version of it by rewarding electric vehicle customers for removing the emissions through a variety of incentives. Is there also room for starting to price in the pollution impact and the public health impact of petrol and diesel cars? Yeah,
I think there is. I mean, obviously, I prefer a carrot to a stick, and I also am, fiscally conservative. So I think actually trying to convince the government to take away revenue as opposed to incent growth or those types of things are difficult. But I do think there are plenty of models around the world that have worked, and so so there are things that we can do that are small, medium, and large. In terms of having that playing field that consumers and industry know that's going to be in place for a period of time, and then can actually make buying decisions based on that.
Just wondering, with your global hat on and not your sort of Australian pride part of the hat on here, you do have a lot of countries that have targets in place, mandates in place. You mentioned targets would be nice, but there are other things you can do. What does that not having something as big as a target in place and really the absence of anything in place, what does that difference sort of mean for you guys?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we obviously are across what's happening globally. What we see is consumer behaviour and changing. I lived in California for a long period of time. There were incentives in place, and now actually not incentives in place on buying electric vehicles. But what they also did was change the social aspect where you could get into the high occupancy vehicle lane. In California, pre-COVID, the traffic was so bad that that actually drove a lot of the incentive rather than anything else. But there's also things like the regulatory environment of having charging infrastructure in place in your place of work, as well as multi-tenancy buildings and that type of thing. But I also think we as a country have the potential of being left behind by not having those adoption rates go up over time. So we'll be using old technology rather than the latest technology. So, so things like what we've seen in Germany recently in terms of the announcements there, which is the heart of vehicles or internal combustion vehicles globally, where they've actually put in significant changes to move to electric. I think there are models everywhere around the world that we can use or not use. I'm encouraged by a lot of the discussion today in Australia, but again, I think we need to take those great ideas and put them into action.
It's when you thinking as a sort of electric vehicle leader and not just the Tesla leader for a moment, is it competitive? Is it other countries have these things in place and Australia doesn't, therefore Australia misses out?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the question you were asking before. So, we're 1% to 2% of the global vehicle market, not electric vehicle market. And so for companies to invest in Australia, even though, as I said, I think that volume of production is a sustainable industry in terms of Australia. But in terms of new investments, seeing that policy certainty over a period of time helps companies invest for the long term. Because as I said before, you're not making an investment for 5-10 years, you're making an investment for 20, 40 years in terms of where you're going to locate for your manufacturing and your markets and that type of thing.
We mentioned before the webinar that really Tesla's language is around changing the way transport works, the way mobility works, and something that's just come up here in Australia and New South Wales today, the Federal Financial Review Commission with I think maybe an old colleague of yours, David Doherty, headed up one of the recommendations being a road user charge for electric vehicles. Our concern usually being one around timing of, there are smart things to think about in the future, but Australia's behind the rest of the world. Is this the right time for us to be talking about a new charge? Thinking about that competition and the impacts that it has, is how do you view something like a market that doesn't have those incentives being in place, talking about a new charge?
Yeah, I think, as I said, carrot or stick. I obviously would prefer that they didn't do that. I mean, for me, again, it's not just about the disincentive for, electric vehicles, but it's actually denying consumers the opportunity of participating in new technology. It would be like when the iPhone came in, that we put an extra surcharge on top of the iPhone versus a different phone, and expect people to wear that additional charge. It's a bit crazy.
iPhones aren't paying landline fees.
Yeah,
we better put them on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Add a premium on top of the use of that new technology. It seems a strange concept to me. And I think it comes back to the EVs have become politicized in Australia versus treating them like technology. It's a new type of technology. It would be like saying, well, we're not going to go to internal combustion vehicles from steam transport or horse and carts because we like what we have. It's a little bit strange, and it's unusual for us to be doing that.
And that politicization must certainly stand out to your friends globally as well, right? We look at this isn't a political issue in the UK, New Zealand, really anywhere else. And both sides of politics agree electric vehicles are the future and there's a benefit to it.
Yeah, well, and I think that will happen. I think, obviously pre-COVID with the bushfires over the summer, I think there was quite a lot of discussion about not just the vehicle side, but also the full supply chain around electricity production and generation, and how do we do that using renewables, and industry taking it on themselves to actually look at their whole energy usage and supply chain, and a number of different companies coming out saying that they would get to a zero carbon footprint or significantly reduce their carbon footprint over a period of time. So I think, to me, it will happen. It's a matter of when. And I think, again, it comes back to education around this is a technology change. Yes, it does have environmental benefits, but it also has economic benefits, and it has societal benefits beyond the economic benefits, given the reduction in pollution and that type of thing. I just live down the road here in Waverton, and my office at home is in sort of like the top of the house, and I get to see out over the valley. And for the whole of the COVID period of time, there was no haze on the actual horizon. And today I was looking out there, and the haze is back.
So come back.
And, for me, the utopia would be that we can get the economic activity back without the without the haze, without the pollution there. And the technology is available on both the generation of electricity side and also on the EV side. So to me, it's holding the country back if we don't take advantage of that. And I actually flip it around. I think we have the opportunity of being a superpower in this renewable energy space, because a lot of the components that go into an EV, particularly on the battery side, we have here and most other countries don't. We ship out the raw materials. Yeah. So I think it's 8 or 9 out of 10 components in the battery technology, the raw materials that we actually have in abundance in Australia.
I think surely makes us a good candidate to be evaluating building some of that.
I think it's amazing. Yeah. And I do think on the renewable energy side, there is more of a momentum behind that to actually be a leader. Right. It will happen on the EV side, it's just not there today.
Yeah, right. This is, a few times you've mentioned that, and I think certainly there's acceptance globally that we're no longer talking about if, we're talking about when, and you're the chair of a company that's very mission driven. If there are easier products to sell, but you've particularly decided to get into selling renewable energy products, selling electric vehicle products. When you guys think, sitting around that board table or as an organization, thinking about when, not if, do you have your own ideas around when these changes really need to occur for us to sort of be meeting the goals of that mission of protecting our environment?
Yeah, I think, the whole mission of the company is to accelerate the advent of sustainable energy, to actually get to that point faster. Now, when that point is, I'm not sure that we really have a crystal clear view. As I said, when I joined the board 6 years ago, we knew it would start to happen, but again, I think that tipping point is behind us. What we've got to do now is see the acceleration of that around the world, and that has happened over the last 5 years or so, and that's with us with a limited range of vehicles. I mean, we have 3 or 4 vehicles in that are actually in production, and a few planned. If the industry starts to produce what they're talking about as well, that whole acceleration will happen much faster.
I think we've certainly seen that you've proved the point, and other companies often do come along and follow, and it helps seed a market as a whole. I do wonder, how much do you guys think about this as a board, or does the organisation think about this coming back of these are the things we need to do to change the ecosystem to make that when sooner?
Yeah, I mean, there's everybody at the company is focused from the factory floor through to the board room on actually accelerating the advent of sustainable energy. So talking about it every day is exactly what the company's doing, and not just talking about putting it in action. And if things don't work in a particular market, then we'll quickly move to do something else. So it's a young enough company. I mean, it was only founded in 2003, and the thing with being a startup company and more of a challenger in the marketplace is you can continue to drive that change because you don't have a preconceived view of what needs to happen in the industry. So we were talking about this a little bit before. Yeah. So I've been fortunate enough to work with a number of challengers, whether it's in the networking or compute space, and now with obviously being on the board of Chezza. And it is a different mindset. It's how to actually make it happen as opposed to if you can make it happen. Right. So a lot of the dialogue is what do we need to do to be successful in this market, in this part of the vehicle segment. And it's, from our perspective, it's not about just creating the best EV, it's about creating the best vehicle in that category, in that segment, that type of thing. And so, and it's about not, the electric vehicle being a bigger proportion of the overall vehicle market. It's actually flipping the whole industry to being electric. And so I think that's the mindset that we have as a company, and it's across the board. You don't have to have, we're here in the conference room, there's no slogan on the wall saying, to accelerate the advent of sustainable energy. Right. It's Tesla's mission. Everybody is, working on that every day.
I think having an astronaut in one of your cars in outer space sends a pretty clear message of what the expectation is for employees really well. Anyway, there's a thing you mentioned there that I really quite liked around how can we make it work, not if we can make it work.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you think Tesla still benefits from that, or is everybody else caught up with you guys now when they're in the how to make it work space?
Yeah, I think, again, our mindset's different. From the beginning, it wasn't about us being the only electric vehicle company. It was us being an electric vehicle only, but not being the only one. And in fact, it's that, adoption or pragmatic way of other vehicle companies actually starting to produce their own electric vehicles to us is more of a successful signpost than anything else. Right. So, because if the industry is going there, it's going to be more than us that actually does that.
Of course, yeah. I wonder, a lot of what you describe, it's very, being that challenger, creating that positive change. It's a very fun role, but it can also be a very challenging one. There are a lot of easier things to do, and particularly thinking about you and your approach to being the chair of a company like this. What do you think is important for a business to be able to keep doing this sustainably? Because Tesla does keep challenging.
Yeah, it's definitely a 24/7 company. It doesn't sleep because the mission is still, in front of us and not accomplished. And so, from my perspective, I actually like being with challenges. I've discovered that about myself. Even when I was at Toyota was number 3 or 4 in the Australian market when I first joined Toyota. And that's a long time ago, so late 80s. And so I actually prefer to be the underdog, changing the way things are done, and to be part of that, from a company perspective. And so I have that natural affinity with Tesla doing that.
If you're thinking about, the way that you approach that job, again, and particularly as a chair and not a CEO doing this.
That's right. It's very different.
In that day-to-day when you're thinking about your role as chair, sort of what type of thoughts are front of mind to help steer a ship?
Yeah, I mean, from a board perspective, our role is to, help the management team, make sure the management team is doing what they need to do and what we can do to help them achieve that. And that may not be a traditional way. Obviously, we have our fiduciary obligations to all shareholders to uphold and to execute, but we're also there to help the management team achieve the mission of the company. And I think, that's what consumes us as a board. We're a very engaged board, I think a very good board. I'm a little bit biased, but it's a great board in terms of the individuals that we have around the table and people who have great expertise in their own right that actually can help the company navigate different things. From my perspective, it's a great role. It's full on, but it's a great role.
So you probably have one of the challenges that very few other people in a chair position like yours would have, is in that the CEO that you manage has, easy to say, the highest profile in the electric vehicle industry and probably among the highest profiles in the entire world. Does that create its own set of interesting things to think about? I won't say the word challenges.
No, I mean, I think it's phenomenal that I get to work with, Elon and people of his caliber through Tesla. It's great for me. I actually really enjoy it.
Wonderful. I'm thinking a little bit around Chezza and some of the work that you're doing to actually get people enjoying electric vehicles. I guess we often think about the stuff that does make sense if people bought vehicles using a spreadsheet, right? Of the costs are lower, it's cheaper to run, it's better for the environment. All of those things are great, but I think what often I find sells people is getting behind the wheel of one and driving one.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is great. Yeah. What else is on your guys' mind in terms of how else do you get people in their environment saying, this is the thing that I want to drive, this is what I want the future to be?
Yeah, I think firstly, the driving experience is phenomenal. And the reason why it is because the team had a blank sheet of paper when they were designing the vehicles. And that blank sheet of paper started with the driver, as opposed to starting with a traditional way of making a vehicle. And so I think you can see that in any of the vehicles that we have, from the touchscreen, and how that actually is the one place to go to for all of the requirements of the driver, and that continues to advance. I think the 3 core capabilities that we have as a EV manufacturer, and it spills over into the energy side of the business as well, is actually the software that we produce. And it's software from the ground up, not just in the vehicle, but also how we make the vehicles, as I was saying before. It's also true on the energy side as well. And the battery technology, and we continue to evolve that battery technology. Many people say to me, well, lithium ion's been around for forever. Well, yes and no, it has been, but the advances that we've made year in and year out in terms of performance, throughput, and also range for the vehicles is stunning. The stat that I love is that when we introduced the Model S in 2012, the range that we announced at that point, there isn't another vehicle in production today that can actually beat that range that we announced, that we had at that point in time today.
Right.
So, and we've increased the range of the Model S. So to me, that second prong of battery technology is really key. And again, that spills over into our energy, and they're symbiotic, because the things that you need in stationary storage are different to the mobile storage, but there's some synergies between the two in terms of how things work, and then the volume and scale and all of that sort of stuff. And then the third thing for me is the motor technology that we have as well. And it's the combination of all three things, to me, that makes the vehicle so interesting and so different. And I am a bit of a car buff. So from my perspective, I really enjoy driving the EV. I did a trip in January to New Zealand, and we wanted to do the whole trip in electric vehicles, and I drove different electric vehicles, not just Teslas, and it's very different, the experience that you get driving a different car.
A good place to stop there on the different electric vehicles, because you won't be surprised to hear that we've got a lot of very enthusiastic current and potential electric vehicle customers, Tesla customers on our line here. And one of the overwhelming things coming through of when can they drive things like the Model Y here in Australia? How much will it cost you? Any sneak previews for us?
I don't have any sneak previews.
Okay.
No, I am. I've actually driven a Model Y. I love it. It's a great car. I can't wait for it to be here as well, but I don't have any breaking news on that.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. So I'll go back then. I thought I'd try to see if I can get something from you there, but I'll just go back to the point you were making. And there are some really important, so I guess so many different important things for a company like yours to tackle. And I guess you've always sort of made your job so much harder by trying to fix so many things and trying to, advance so many things. In your mind, is there a sort of is there a prioritization already of which elements do we drive forwards the most, or do you just need to do everything at full speed?
So the company's very nimble in terms of moving forward with things. We do things pretty quickly. I think to have in any company, as you're driving the amount of change that we're driving, but as I said before, in any challenger company, you've got to have focus and consistency in terms of executing, in terms of establishing the priorities and executing against those as an organisation. You've got to also have tenacity, and you've got to have resilience as well. So to me, those four things together are key ingredients for any challenger company. And I think Tesla does have those in spades in terms of focus and consistency. The mission has not changed since the day the company, was first founded. And, stick to a type of thing, the resilience to be able to keep inventing new ways of doing things, and also, to continue to challenge the status quo in different areas, because it's multiple industries that we're disrupting at the same time.
I'm going to stick with you a bit on the point around resilience, because I think it's one thing, particularly for a startup company, to have tenacity when it begins. But given you guys have done it better than, you've been a very successful example of it. So what do you put into an organization, or what do you look for to be able to keep having that tenacity moving forward?
I think it comes down to people. I mean, to me, people are the lifeblood of any technology company. You can't have a technology company where you don't have consistency of values. And given that Tesla's mission is so focused and people know what that is, that value stream actually permeates the entire company. So I think that's really important. I will also say that that values focus and mission focus has been there for the other challenger companies that I've worked with before. And I think it's incredibly important because you will go through different periods of time as a company in the life cycle of what you're trying to do. You'll come across different things. We weren't counting on a pandemic, but we have one. Different economic periods of times happen, and you've got to have that ability to draw people forward with the optimism of what it is that you're shooting for to actually get through those difficult periods. And I think that's a strong trait of the leadership of the company, actually, of any company that's trying to, work through a multi-year, multi-generational sort of change. I was on the board of ABB for a period of time, and one of the reasons why I joined that board was because they're a 125-year-old innovation company, and yes, they're in the power space, and these days robotics, and also in process automation and those types of things. But they have they've had a multi-generational set of capabilities of reinventing themselves and innovating over that period of time. And to me, that's the key. There's very few 100-year-old technology companies out there, and so I think what we're doing here at Tesla is to be that beachhead in terms of the whole sustainable energy mantra.
Great, thanks a lot for that. I think I just want to bring you back to Australia for a little while now, back where we started with the conversation, because what we spoke a lot about were, I guess, there are challenges that we do have right now, where we could be going. There's a lot of hope for what the future could look like because of who Australians are and how much they like technology, and how entrepreneurial and innovative they are. I would imagine you've probably had more time than usual to spend in Australia and being in one place, given your sort of global corporate profile. Is there anything that's happening in Australia right now that you're particularly excited about?
So I think I'm actually really optimistic about Australia overall. I think the way we handled the pandemic was exceptional. I think we're still handling it, but we're still handling it very well. And I think it's that resilience to get through. Maybe it is because of our heritage of getting through, flood, fires, and not famine, but everything else, where we do go through these periods of time where it's really tough. And I think we're exceptionally good in a crisis, and we've proven that again through this pandemic period of time. I also think we have the right raw ingredients as we go forward to actually build the next 30 years of growth, because we've had 30 years of growth. It may be smaller digit growth than other countries around the world, but 30 years of growth is amazing. And so, and it's not just on the resources space, it's on the intellectual capital that we have in the country, and it's also on the ability to get things done. And so that's why I think using this as an opportunity, because the economy is going to reset anyway, to actually reset it in a slightly different direction in various industries will set us up, I think, brilliantly. So so I don't know that I answered your question, but to me, I'm hugely optimistic about what the country can do.
I was asking a different question, but that was a better answer than the question that I was asking. But I will get back to where I wanted to go. I guess in that key area that, the piece that we don't have when it comes to the public policy around electric vehicles. I can imagine you've spent some time speaking with a lot of different Australian leaders. How do you think that they're viewing electric vehicles? Do they realise there's a need for change there? Are you optimistic that something will give?
I think it's starting to happen. I think we've seen some of the state governments, the ACT, move forward. I think that's a good model for us. I think there's some movements in some of the states, but I also think on the energy side, we're starting to see at least the dialogue and debate be less about the politics and more about what we can do as a country moving forward. So again, maybe it's because I'm an optimist, but I do think, again, we have pretty good governments when you compare us to other parts of the world. If we can get away from the politics of it and get into the technology of it, which to me is, it will set the right path as we need to have. And so I'm optimistic that we will get there.
You were saying earlier that businesses take these sort of downturns as that opportunity to reassess.
They do.
To the future.
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, again, just being around technology for a long period of time, the things that you invest in through the downturn are the things that actually make the company in the future. And I think it's the same for a country.
Right.
So, you know, I think, you know, one of the things that does worry me as a country, we're spending less on R&D today than we used to. But we can do it. We've got great R&D organisations out there. And so if we're focused and we do it on things that we can actually win at commercially long term, then I think, you know, it will set the country up in a positive manner for the next, you know, period of time.
Yeah, given we've got this opportunity right now, you know, we're coming out of this period. If you were to give your prescription, let's say a list of 3, you can make it as many as you want, of what would you like to see Australia do in, I guess, turning the corner? Yeah,
I do think embrace the new technologies around renewable energy and around electric vehicles, and actually create it as an opportunity for us, not just to use the technology, but to be a player in the technology as we move forward. So, yeah, and we have seen that. I mean, with some of the autonomous vehicle or software coming from Australian entrepreneurs. I mean, from our perspective, it's not just about the hardware, it is about the software, and we do have great software engineers in Australia. And I think we can use that in the you know, in the electric vehicle space, in the energy space, and in all of the you know, advanced manufacturing that I think we should be doing.
I'll put you a little bit on the spot here and let me know if it's unfair, but given you're seasoned at sort of scanning opportunities from a corporate perspective, if you're looking at Australia in the electric vehicle industry, particularly sort of, you know, around what we can be doing today, where do you think that big opportunity is for us?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm taking my Tesla hat off, but again, I think we have great automotive expertise that can actually be pivoted towards very easily towards the electric vehicle space, and whether that's full-blown manufacturing, or whether it's component manufacturing, or whether it's you know, working on various of the supply chains around electric vehicles. I think we do have that capability.
Wonderful. Robyn, you've been very generous with your time tonight. We are coming up and we're almost up to the very end of our time. And I really particularly appreciate, I think something we really asked for was obviously we want to hear from you as the chair of Tesla, but also just as an, you know, as an industry thought leader in this space, and to be able to sort of take your Tesla hat off from time to time. So thank you so much for being able to do that. I know it can be sensitive sometimes when you have a job to do, to be able to talk more broadly, but we'll take it in kind, as that's exactly what you were doing at those times. I'll leave you with the final word of, is there anything that you'd sort of like to leave as a parting message to our audience? Yeah, I would say thank you for the work that you're doing as an EV fraternity out there. I think it's phenomenal work. I think, you know, that we need to amplify that message in government, but also with the consumer population and with industries as well, because as I mentioned before, many industries, many Australian companies are actually taking the mantle of their own carbon footprint, and vehicle logistics and transportation is a big part of that. So to me, amplifying it in those 3 sort of constituencies will actually further the industry and help the adoption rate much faster. So thank you. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Have a good night.